I feel confident in saying that the medic is a class with a lot of unrealized potential, specifically in Man vs Machine mode, where the class is generally regarded as having a fairly set-in-stone meta. But sticking to such a strict format of play vastly undermines the surprising level of diversity and utility the medic has. To best illustrate this point, consider the mediguns. It's well established that the Kritzkrieg is the go-to for getting the job done. But after that, what's the second best medigun? And how close does it come to the Kritzkrieg in terms of viability? Not including the Kritzkrieg itself, the medic has access to three different mediguns: the stock medigun, the quick fix, and the vaccinator. The stock medigun is straightforward, with plain and simple invulnerability, while the quick fix and the vaccinator boast more complex inner workings, with the quick fix capable of effectively healing 800 HP per second, and the vaccinator offering bursts of 94% damage resistance. It's these latter two mediguns I'd like to give a spotlight, and offer some insight on just what makes them worth a serious consideration. I'm Luxord, and let's talk about the quick fix. For a more thorough clarification, I'm specifically focusing on using the quick fix in the Man vs Machine game mode. The use of every medigun is more or less well enough known outside of MvM, but inside of MvM there's a solidified meta surrounding the medic, which has led to other options generally receiving less consideration from experienced players. Additionally, with the introduction of upgrades in MvM, the utility of an item can change significantly with the appropriate setup. Personally speaking, majority of my own Man vs Machine experience comes from Caligula's Caper, otherwise known as Wave 666, or Ghost Town. Part of what makes this important is that my goal is to showcase how upgrades synergize with, and otherwise enhance the quick fix, transforming it into a medigun with serious potential. Playing on Ghost Town helps display this with its larger than usual credit pool, allowing for many upgrades to be utilized right away, rather than the slower progression of other wave-by-wave missions. With that in mind, let's get into the quick fix as a medigun, and how the upgrades actually affect it. The quick fix on paper is actually quite a simple medigun. The main idea behind it is all about healing, as it boasts a very impressive 40% faster heal rate over all other mediguns. To counterbalance this raw healing power, the quick fix also receives a hefty 50% reduction to the maximum amount of overheal it can give a patient. These two stats of the quick fix define it as a medigun meant to spread healing across the team, enabling the medic to more efficiently recover the lost health of several teammates. Meanwhile, the reduction in overheal further discourages the medic from keeping the heal beam trained on only one person and neglecting the rest of the team. As a quick side note, all mediguns can heal up to 3 times faster depending on when the target last took damage. This is sometimes referred to as crit healing and reaches full strength 15 seconds after taking no damage. The impact or utility of this feature is largely outside the scope of this video, besides a brief mention. This is because crit healing isn't particularly relevant in MvM much of the time, so going forward, any healing speeds mentioned will refer to the base heal rate unless otherwise stated. While the healing efficiency is certainly a nice boon to the quick fix, the main appeal of any given medigun ultimately comes down to the most crucial feature, the Ubercharge. This ability is the crux of the medic, and by design has the capacity to be the most powerful feature in the game. In essence, if a medigun doesn't have a good Ubercharge, then it probably isn't worth using much. And while the quick fix's Ubercharge is anything but bad, it is somewhat more complex and harder to understand than the simpler Ubercharges of either the stock or the Kritzkrieg. First and foremost, the quick fix's Ubercharge ramps up the healing speed by a factor of 3, reaching a total heal speed of just over 100 HP per second for the duration of the Uber. This is the most apparent feature of the quick fix's Uber and works best when applied to a group of teammates who all need a large amount of healing done in a pinch. However, the quick fix actually has a secondary effect to its Ubercharge, and one that often flies under the radar. While Ubercharged by the quick fix, the medic and their patient receive complete immunity to all knockback or any other form of movement impairing effects. With a basic understanding of the quick fix and its Ubercharge out of the way, let's start to take a look at how the upgrades from Man vs Machine apply to the quick fix. All mediguns have access to a set of 6 upgrades, which can be organized into 3 distinct types of upgrades. These being Ubercharge upgrades, healing upgrades, and ability upgrades. To start off easy, let's get the Ubercharge upgrades out of the way first, as these are ultimately the same on any medigun, and don't really have any special effect for the quick fix. Starting with the simplest upgrade, Ubercharge Duration, simply increases the amount of time that the Ubercharge lasts. By default, most mediguns have a 8-second duration, and this upgrade adds a flat 2 seconds per level, totaling out at a maximum of 14 seconds for their Uber duration. Ubercharge Rate, on the other hand, increases the speed at which the mediguns will charge their Uber, up to a maximum of 100% regardless of the medigun's base stats. This is important to note as the quick fix does come with a base 10% increase to its build speed. What this means is that Uber Rate will add a full 25% to this initial 10% for the first 3 points of the upgrade, but the 4th point will only add 15% as the build rate is not allowed to pass 100% total. The healing upgrades is where the quick fix starts to become much more interesting in MvM, however, as these upgrades have very significant ramifications for how effective it can be. Healing Mastery is listed as having 3 different effects, but we can safely ignore 2 of them. Firstly, self-heal rate only refers to the base amount of HP regen the medic always has by default, and will have no unique effect on the quick fix. Next, revive rate is basically the exact same as heal rate, with no significant differences between the two. So effectively speaking, Healing Mastery gives us a 25% increase to healing speed per level, maxing out at 100% faster healing speed. But unlike Ubercharge Rate, Healing Mastery does not adjust for the quick fix's base stats in any way, so the quick fix's already 40% faster healing speed gets doubled with this upgrade. In other words, Healing Mastery is 40% more effective on the quick fix than it is for other mediguns. Now, if you recall, the quick fix's Uber makes it heal even faster, and yes, Healing Mastery also boosts this healing speed, boosting the healing speed to about 200 HP per second for the duration of the Uber, or enough healing to fully heal all but one class in just under 1 second. The next upgrade is Overheal Expert, and this upgrade has possibly the strangest interaction with the quick fix. First of all, this upgrade increases the amount of overheal that the mediguns give, while also making that overheal drain slower after the heal beam gets disconnected. Fully upgrading Overheal Expert then suggests that the amount of overheal given should be doubled. Oh, okay, there's clearly something more to this upgrade than meets the eye. When Overheal Expert says it increases overheal by 25%, it's actually referring to 25% of the patient's maximum HP. By default, overheal is 50% of a teammate's HP added on top of their HP. Overheal Expert is just adding 25% to that 50% per level, which adds up to a total of 150% of a patient's maximum HP. Which is why this upgrade actually triples the amount of overheal given, rather than only doubling it. Now, let's see how this affects the quick fix. Yeah, as it turns out, Overheal Expert works the exact same way on the quick fix, despite the listed 50% reduction to overheal. In practice, the quick fix just adds 25% of a patient's maximum HP as overheal, instead of the usual 50%. However, Overheal Expert still just adds a full 25% to that, allowing the quick fix to overheal a teammate with 125% of their maximum HP. In effect, this makes the overheal reduction on the quick fix less impactful, as fully upgrading Overheal Expert turns that 50% less overheal into only about 17% less overheal. Now, despite all that, Overheal Expert still has one more trick when it comes to the quick fix, and it actually comes from not upgrading it at all. You see, normally, the build rate of Ubercharge gets cut in half when healing someone above about 140% of their maximum HP from overheal. This is to encourage the medic to heal other people to build Uber as fast as possible. Every medigun by default heals a patient to 150% of their HP, or rather every medigun except for the quick fix, which only heals to 125% by default. This means that the quick fix never reaches that 140% threshold, and as a result, never gets its uber rate cut in half. But because of how Overheal Expert works, even one level of the upgrade will push the quick fix to 150%. So by not upgrading Overheal Expert at all, the quick fix can consistently build Ubercharge substantially faster than every other medigun. And finally, there are the ability upgrades. These upgrades are generally considered the strongest upgrades available to the medic, so let's give them careful consideration. Rather than increasing various pre-existing stats on the miniguns, they instead offer completely new abilities to use in supporting the team. In that respect, it may seem like these upgrades aren't dependent on what medigun the medic uses, as they do their own thing rather than synergizing with the medigun's stats. However, I'd argue the quick fix genuinely makes the best use of both these upgrades. The projectile shield upgrade gives the medigun a second chargeable ability, akin to Ubercharge, which allows the medic to deploy a large energy shield in front of them to block incoming damage for both the medic and anyone else behind the shield. While the functionality of the shield is the exact same across all mediguns, it's important to consider that unlike Ubercharge, the projectile shield charges based off of the amount of healing done, rather than alongside healing. This means that faster healing directly translates into faster charging for the shield. This means that not only will Healing Mastery charge the shield faster, but the quick fix's innate 40% faster healing doubles as a 40% bonus to shield charging speed, which is a boon no other medigun can take advantage of, allowing the quick fix to have much more uptime with the shield. Then, there's Canteen Specialist, which makes use of the Canteen feature in MvM. To summarize, the Canteens are essentially short-lived power-ups that can be used on demand. Every class has access to these, and they're an excellent burst of power for more intense sections of a wave. Medic is a class that, independently, can't make very significant use of these effects, so to compensate, the medic can use Canteen Specialist to share the effects of their Canteen with the teammate they're currently healing. In addition to this, Canteen Specialist also makes the canteens last longer and cost less credits. So, how does the quick fix make better use of this upgrade compared to the other mediguns? Well, it just so happens that the most prominent effects of the canteens are identical to the Ubercharge effects of the stock medigun and the Kritzkrieg, whereas there is not a canteen that replicates the effects of the quick fix Ubercharge. This means that the quick fix can at least somewhat mirror the utility of stock and Kritzkrieg, while also remaining unrivaled when it comes to the ability of healing. This is amplified by the fact that Canteen Specialist doesn't require the medic to continue healing the teammate they share their canteen with, unlike Ubercharge, which will only boost whoever the medic is actively healing. This adds a layer of multitasking for the medic where they could give a crit canteen to an ally doing heavy damage, but then still be free to shift focus on other teammates to keep them healed up and alive without the worry of being tied down like other miniguns might cause. Earlier, I made the dubious claim that the quick fix could effectively heal 800 HP per second. After covering the quick fix's stats, the Ubercharge, and the medigun's upgrades, the quick fix comes out with a healing speed of just about 200 HP per second. While 200 is by no means worth sneezing at, there is still 600 HP per second unaccounted for. While in truth, 200 HP per second is the true fastest healing speed that the quick fix can manage. However, the key distinction here is that the quick fix can effectively heal 800 HP per second. This might sound pedantic, but to begin explaining how the quick fix gets this 4 times increase to the potency of its healing, we have one more set of upgrades to take a look at. Those upgrades are the resistance upgrades, and they're separate from the medigun upgrades previously covered, in that they're located in the body upgrade section and every class has access to them. Resistances are upgrades that vary in importance from class to class, but are universally useful for all as they do one simple thing. They make you take less damage from various damage types. Upgrades exist for resisting bullet, blast, and fire damage. There's an additional resistance upgrade for critical damage, but that upgrade itself isn't the most intuitive. So let's first just consider the first three. These upgrades all increase resistance by the same amount, so to keep things short and simple, let's just assume you will always have the correct resistance and treat this as an overall damage resistance. Understanding the usefulness of resistances is inherently very easy. Taking less damage means better survivability. However, it is often harder to understand just how impactful resistances can be, so in order to simplify that, there's the concept of effective health. This is essentially the idea of converting what resistance would be like if instead of lowering incoming damage, it actually increased how much health you have. For example, say you have 50% damage resistance. This would halve any incoming damage taken, and would subsequently allow you to survive twice as much heat. So an alternative way to view 50% resistance is to say you effectively have twice as much health. This makes things much more straightforward, as many sources of damage have different damage numbers, and so they would all be reduced by different amounts. And that's all a lot to try and calculate. Instead, effective health only requires your own health pool to be used for calculation, and everything else can be treated as the same. However, HP is not the only value affected by using effective health. This concept also impacts healing. Since no actual HP values are being changed, it takes a medic the same amount of time to heal someone the same amount of HP. So while resistance makes each individual health point more valuable, it does the exact same for each individual point of health healed by a medic. With the previous example of 50% resistance, or 100% more effective health, this means the medic will effectively heal twice as fast. Applying this to what we know about the quick fix so far, this would increase the effective healing from 200 per second right up to 400 per second. But this still assumes a 50% resistance to damage, and as it turns out, MvM upgrades can go much higher than that. At 25% per level, for 3 levels, resistance for each damage type can go up to 75%. This makes each health point not twice as valuable, but 4 times as valuable. This comes from the fact that resistance upgrades actually become exponentially more impactful for each level, which is much easier to see when you're converting to effective health. But what this means for the medic is that whatever your heal rate was before, assuming you're healing someone with full resistance, your effective heal rate is now 4 times higher. For the upgraded quick fix Ubercharge, this turns 200 HP per second into an effective 800 HP per second. Alright, that was all a lot of information to take in, but all of it is very important to really appreciating the deceptive depth of the quick fix. However, now that all is said and done, let's get a quick recap of the quick fix, and mainly focus on why the quick fix stands out against other options. I imagine a lot of people would be quick to point out the stock medigun and its total invulnerability while Ubered, and while yes, the quick fix's Uber is ultimately weak to very high amounts of burst damage, it's actually fairly rare to receive this much damage all at once. Meanwhile, the stock Uber is vulnerable to something significantly more common: knockback. I only briefly mentioned this feature of the quick fix earlier, but that's because it's exactly as advertised. There's really nothing to explain. You can't get pushed around or slowed down by anything during the quick fix Uber, and negating knockback is actually very hard to come by. If I had to choose, I'd even take the immunity to knockback over stock Uber, even without the quick fix's incredible healing speed. Now with that out of the way, the quick fix still needs to stand up to the Kritzkrieg, and I think it absolutely does. I'd even go as far to say that the Kritzkrieg is only really superior in dealing with tanks or cheesing waves with the Scottish resistance. And even still, if you have access to canteens and canteen specialists, I think the ability to give someone crits without having to keep the heal beam on them comes with several benefits that the quick fix enjoys greatly. Maybe it would be a different story if there was a canteen that gave immunity to knockback and also gave 200 HP regeneration per second, but when I put it like that, those effects sound pretty OP, don't they? Oh, and as for the Vaccinator, well, if I'm being honest, the Vaccinator deserves a deep dive on its own, and we've already been here quite a while. I do want to cover the Vaccinator, but that is certainly a topic for another day. So, until then, I've been Luxord, and hey, next time you play Medic and MvM, maybe consider using the quick fix. It's good fun, competes with the Kritzkrieg, and if the stars align, it might even do you one better.